Chapter 1. A new routine. The first thing Mike Howell noticed about retirement was that nobody cared what time he woke up. After 24 years in the Navy, that felt deeply suspicious. His eyes opened at 0500 anyway. They always did. For nearly a month after retiring, he kept expecting somebody to call and tell him he'd forgotten a watch bill, missed a formation, or somehow accidentally retired by mistake. Nobody ever did. The world simply kept turning. Mike rolled out of bed, made his sheets with practiced efficiency, and padded into the kitchen of his new house. His house. Some mornings that still surprised him. The ranch-style home wasn't fancy, but it was exactly what he'd wanted. 3 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, decent garage, and a swimming pool. The pool had honestly made the decision for him. He poured coffee and stepped onto the back patio. The water reflected the faint pink of dawn. Not bad. Not bad at all. A familiar knock sounded at the back gate. Mike looked at his watch. 6:30, he muttered. Right on time. He opened the gate. Brandon immediately walked past him carrying a large cardboard box. Good morning to you too. Morning, Dad. Mike laughed. His son set the box down inside what had quickly become Brandon's room. For years their relationship had revolved around leave schedules, deployments, video calls, and carefully planned visits. Now Brandon appeared almost every day. Mike loved it. So what's in the box? Brandon grinned. Important stuff. That doesn't answer the question. Exactly. The teenager began unpacking enough gaming equipment to threaten the local power grid. Mike folded his arms. How many screens do you actually need? All of them. That's not a number. It's the correct number. Mike shook his head. You're lucky I was a medic and not an engineer. I don't understand any of this. That's because you're old. Mike stared at him. I'm 42. Ancient. One day you'll be 42. Brandon didn't even look up. I'll have evolved by then. Mike laughed despite himself. It happened a lot around his son. The years they had lost still bothered him sometimes. Not because his ex-wife had done anything wrong. She hadn't. Neither of them had. Life had simply pulled them in directions that stopped making sense together. Deployments, workups, training, exercises, weeks becoming months becoming years. Mike still remembered the conversation. No accusations, no shouting, no betrayal, just 2 good people acknowledging reality. She had tried. God, she had tried. When she'd finally sat across from him and quietly admitted she couldn't do it anymore, he'd understood. Understanding hadn't made it hurt less, but it had made it easier. He'd helped her move, helped her find an apartment, supported her for years after, and when she'd remarried, he'd stood smiling in the audience. Not because he was pretending, because he genuinely wanted her to be happy. Looking back, he still thought it had been the right thing to do. And now he got days like this. Normal days. Days that belonged to him and Brandon. Mike would not trade them for anything. 40 minutes later, they were both standing in the driveway examining a paint roller disaster. Brandon looked guilty. Mike looked at the paint covering both of his shoes. They stared at each other. Neither spoke. Then Brandon snorted. Mike lost the battle first. Within seconds both of them were laughing. You dropped the entire tray. It attacked me. The tray attacked you. Without warning. Of course. I'm a victim. Mike shook his head. Get a hose. The teenager ran off. Mike smiled. For the first time since becoming a father, he felt present. Actually present. Not a voice on a phone. Not a face on a screen. Not somebody leaving again next week. Just Dad. The thought followed him several days later as he drove to work before sunrise. The local hospital had become another pleasant surprise. The transition from military medicine had gone smoother than expected. People treated him with respect. More importantly, they treated patients well. That mattered. A lot. As he turned onto his street that evening, a movement caught his eye. An older man stood beside a flagpole in a front yard a few houses down. The man carefully lowered the American flag. Every movement was deliberate, respectful, professional. Mike watched for a moment before continuing home. The next morning, he saw the same man raising it. The morning after that, too. Then again. And again. By the 4th day, Mike found himself smiling. Most people wouldn't notice. Military people did. The flag went up at the appropriate time. Came down properly every evening. Every single day. Consistency like that meant something. The following morning, Mike left his house early. He walked down the sidewalk and waited. At precisely the time he'd expected, the front door opened. The older man stepped outside carrying a folded flag. He stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly. Mike raised a hand. Morning. Morning. The man's posture screamed military. Retired military, perhaps, but definitely military. Mike covered the remaining distance between them. My name's Mike Howell. The older man nodded. Grant Adams. Mike smiled. I recently retired. Something flickered in Grant's eyes. What branch? Navy. Grant studied him. Not many retired Navy guys volunteer to stand around before sunrise. Hospital Corpsman. The reaction was instantaneous. Recognition. Understanding. Respect. With the Marines? Most of my career. Grant's expression softened. That explains it. Mike gestured toward the flag. I noticed what you were doing. Grant glanced at the pole. Been doing it for years. I can tell. Neither man spoke for a moment. Then Mike cleared his throat. I was wondering if you could use a hand. Grant blinked. A hand? With colors. The older man's eyebrows rose. Mike could almost see him reevaluating the conversation. Finally Grant nodded. Well, Chief. Mike laughed. How'd you know? I've met Corpsman before. Fair. Grant held out the folded flag. You know the procedure? Mike took it carefully. Yes, sir. The Marine's grin appeared instantly. Good answer. The morning air felt cool and familiar. For a few minutes they worked without needing many words. The rhythm came naturally. Years of ceremony. Years of respect. Years of tradition. At the proper time they raised the colors. Grant stood at attention. Mike's movements remained crisp despite months out of uniform. When it was finished, both men relaxed. Grant looked unexpectedly pleased. So, he said, what are you doing after retirement? Mike shrugged. Trying to figure that out. The Marine laughed. It never gets easier. No. Nope. Mike chuckled. That answer felt honest enough to trust. As the sun finally climbed over the rooftops, the two veterans remained standing together beside the flagpole. Talking. Remembering. Understanding without lengthy explanations. For the first time since retirement, Mike felt a small piece of his old life settle comfortably into his new one. And though he didn't know it yet, the simple decision to stand beside a flagpole before sunrise was about to change the entire course of his future. Chapter 2. Sunday Formation. Over the next 3 months, Sunday mornings became Mike Howell's favorite part of the week. Started small. Just him and Grant. Then a couple local veterans had appeared after hearing about the retired Marine major who still raised and lowered the colors every day. Then another. Then 3 more. By the beginning of autumn, half a dozen folding chairs regularly occupied Grant Adams's front lawn after Sunday colors. The conversations lasted for hours. Stories bounced between generations. An Army sergeant from Desert Storm argued with a Vietnam veteran about the proper way to make coffee. A retired Air Force colonel insisted everyone else was doing it wrong. Nobody listened to him. Everyone laughed. Mike found himself looking forward to it. The sense of belonging caught him by surprise. Military service created a strange kind of family. Even after retirement, there were moments when nobody else quite understood certain experiences. These Sunday gatherings filled that gap. Grant loved every minute of it, which was exactly why Mike was standing outside the Navy recruiting station on a Saturday afternoon. The petty officer recruiter opened the door. Can I help you? Mike extended a hand. Chief Mike Howell. Retired. The recruiter's face brightened. Chief, come on in. 10 minutes later, the Marine recruiting office next door had joined the discussion. The Marine gunnery sergeant running the office looked skeptical at first. Then Mike mentioned Grant Adams. The gunny's eyebrows rose. Major Adams? You know him? Everybody around here knows him. Mike smiled. I had a feeling. The gunny leaned back in his chair. He got his Silver Star in Desert Storm. That's what I heard. The Marine recruiter folded his arms. So what's the plan? Mike grinned. Sunday surprise. 2 hours later 20 recruiters had volunteered. Several dozen recruits wanted to participate. The gunny became slightly too enthusiastic. Mike recognized the look. It was the same expression Marines got whenever they were presented with an opportunity to do something dramatic in the name of tradition. By sunset, everyone had orders. Nobody intended to tell Grant. Sunday morning arrived clear and cool. Mike stood on Grant's front lawn wearing his service dress blues for the first time since retirement. The uniform still fit. That fact annoyed him slightly. He'd been hoping retirement would eventually justify eating more pie. Behind him stood rows of Marines, sailors, recruits, and veterans. The gunny paced the formation. Straighten that line. A recruit scrambled. Fix your cover. Another recruit adjusted his cap. The gunny nodded approvingly. Outstanding. Mike checked his watch. Almost time. The Marine sidled up beside him. You ready? Mike looked toward Grant's house. Probably not as ready as he isn't. The gunny laughed. You think he's gonna cry? I think if you tell anybody he cried, he'll kill you. Fair point. The formation settled. A quiet anticipation spread through the crowd. Mike took a breath and walked toward the front door. He knocked. A few moments later the door swung open. Grant stood there in jeans and an old Marine Corps t-shirt. The retired major blinked. Then blinked again. Chief. Morning, sir. Grant narrowed his eyes. Why are you dressed like that? Mike smiled. Seemed appropriate. The older man looked suspicious. Appropriate for what? Mike stepped aside. Grant looked past him. For several seconds he simply stared. Neat rows of uniforms filled his front lawn. Marines, sailors, recruits, veterans. The silence stretched. When Grant finally spoke his voice sounded slightly rough. What is this? Mike straightened. Major. The troops are ready for inspection. Grant continued staring. Mike fought very hard not to grin. But you're out of uniform, sir. Something changed in the older Marine's expression. His shoulders squared. His posture straightened. Years seemed to fall away. Grant nodded once. Thank you, Chief. His voice carried absolute certainty. Stand by. Then he disappeared into the house. The door closed. Mike returned to formation. The gunny smirked. Worked. Oh yeah. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. Every conversation stopped. Grant stepped outside wearing immaculate Marine Corps service dress blues. The medals gleamed. The silver star sat proudly among them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the gunny quietly growled. Now that's a Marine. Mike nodded. Grant approached. Mike gave him a quick inspection. Everything looked perfect. Sir. Grant raised an eyebrow. Yes. The troops are standing by for inspection and colors. The major smiled. No rest for the wicked. The formation snapped to attention as Grant stepped into position. The crisp movement echoed down the street. Neighbors emerged from houses. Children stopped riding bicycles. People gathered quietly on sidewalks. Nobody had expected this. Grant slowly walked down the formation. He exchanged words with recruits, asked names, asked hometowns, asked why they enlisted. Every recruit stood a little taller by the time he moved on. When he reached the front again, he turned toward everyone. The morning had grown completely silent. Grant studied the ranks. When he finally spoke, his voice carried easily. Honor matters. Nobody moved. Tradition matters. Several recruits seemed almost afraid to blink. Courage matters. Grant nodded slowly. But people matter most. The statement hung in the air. Mike watched several veterans quietly straighten. Grant continued. The uniforms eventually come off. The service ends. Time moves on. His gaze swept the gathering. But character remains. The major smiled. And if you're lucky, you'll spend the rest of your life earning the respect of the people standing beside you. The words landed differently from a man who had clearly lived them. Grant stepped back. Mike glanced at his watch. Perfect. The major nodded. Carry on. Mike pulled out his phone. As the opening notes of Reveille sounded, 2 recruits stepped forward. The national ensign began climbing the pole. Everyone stood at attention. The flag reached the top. The morning breeze caught it immediately. For those few moments, the entire street seemed frozen. Reveille ended. Silence lingered. Then Grant quietly said, "At ease." The tension broke. Conversations resumed. Smiles appeared. Several recruits immediately surrounded the major. The old Marine looked happier than Mike had ever seen him. The gunny clapped Mike on the shoulder. "Good idea, Chief." Mike watched Grant laughing with a group of nervous recruits. "I think he deserved it." He did. Neither man looked away from the scene. He really did. What Mike expected to be a one-time event became something else entirely. The following Sunday, people returned. Not all of them. Enough of them. The Sunday after that, even more appeared. Word spread. Veterans told other veterans. Recruiters invited recruits. Families started attending. By October, folding chairs filled half the lawn. Coffee appeared. Donuts followed. Grant complained about the donuts, then ate 3. By November, people came from neighboring towns. Not because anyone advertised, because people needed places where they felt they belonged. The Sunday gathering became exactly that. Mike found himself helping organize things without meaning to. It was a familiar role. The military taught leadership differently than most people realized. Often the best leaders simply stepped forward when something needed doing. So Mike arranged parking, set up chairs, made sure elderly veterans had someplace comfortable to sit. Felt natural, useful, meaningful. One Sunday, while carrying a stack of folding chairs toward the curb, Mike nearly collided with someone. "Oh!" He stopped abruptly. The woman stopped too. A hand settled protectively on the elbow of an older man beside her. Mike adjusted the chairs. "Sorry about that. No harm done." Her voice carried warmth and confidence. Mike looked up and immediately forgot what he'd been about to say. She was probably close to his age. Dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Intelligent eyes. An effortless smile. The sort of woman who looked entirely comfortable with herself. The older gentleman beside her chuckled. "Missed me by a mile." Mike recovered. "Good thing. I'd definitely lose that fight." The older man laughed. "I like him already." The woman rolled her eyes. "Dad, you like everyone." "Not true." "It's absolutely true." Mike smiled. The older man extended a hand. "Bill Bennett." Mike shook it. "Mike Howell." Bill jerked a thumb toward his daughter. "Sarah." Mike turned toward her. "Nice to meet you." "You too." For a moment neither spoke. Then Sarah glanced toward the growing crowd. "This is quite a turnout." It got a little bigger than expected. "A little?" Mike followed her gaze. Well over 100 people occupied the lawn and adjoining street. "Fair point." She folded her arms. "So you're responsible?" Mike pointed toward Grant. "That would be him." Grant immediately chose that exact moment to begin arguing about football with 3 Army veterans. Sarah watched for a second. "He doesn't look terribly responsible." "No. He looks like trouble." That's because he's a Marine. Bill burst out laughing. Several nearby Marines turned toward them. One narrowed his eyes. Hey! Sarah didn't miss a beat. Good morning. The Marine opened his mouth, then closed it. Mike bit the inside of his cheek. The woman was dangerous. Bill seemed delighted. He couldn't defend himself if he wanted to. Sarah grinned. It's one of my gifts. The Marine retreated muttering. Mike finally laughed. You enjoy this. Very much. I can tell. Her eyes sparkled. So can everybody else. Bill patted Mike on the shoulder. I warned you. You absolutely did not. I thought it very loudly. Sarah groaned. Dad. Mike found himself smiling again. Entirely too much. For reasons that had nothing to do with military ceremonies. A whistle sounded from across the lawn. Someone needed help arranging chairs. Mike looked reluctantly toward the call. Duty calls. Sarah immediately pointed toward the volunteers. See? Military. What? You called setting up folding chairs duty. It is duty. No. She shook her head. It's chairs. Mike opened his mouth, then paused, then laughed. Okay, maybe that's fair. I'll give you points for honesty. He started backing away. Nice meeting you. You too, Chief. Mike stopped. How'd you know? Sarah smiled. My dad was Navy. Bill nodded proudly. Chief himself. Mike looked between them. The conspiracy suddenly made sense. Sarah offered a small salute. One that somehow managed to be both respectful and teasing at exactly the same time. Mike laughed again before heading toward the volunteers. As he walked away, he could still hear Bill whispering. Lucky for you he's handsome. Dad. Mike nearly stumbled. The laughter that followed carried across half the lawn. And for the first time in a very long time, Mike found himself looking forward to next Sunday for an entirely new reason. Chapter 3. Civilian casualties. Mike Howell had faced incoming mortar fire. He had treated casualties in combat zones. He had been shot at by people who genuinely wanted him dead. None of those experiences had adequately prepared him for noticing that he was checking the crowd every Sunday morning for one particular woman. It annoyed him. Slightly. Mostly because he kept doing it. The following Sunday he arrived early, helped set up chairs, coordinated parking, assisted Grant with colors, and somehow still found himself scanning the gathering. Not looking for anyone specific. Absolutely not. At least that was what he told himself. You're doing it again. Mike sighed. Grant stood beside him holding a coffee cup. I'm not doing anything. You keep looking toward the street. I'm observing arrivals. Grant nodded solemnly. Of course. It needs to be observed. Naturally. Mike glanced at him. The old Marine was enjoying this entirely too much. Before Mike could defend himself further, Grant pointed. Your observation appears to be arriving. Mike turned. Sarah Bennett and her father were crossing the lawn. Bill waved immediately. Sarah spotted Mike a second later. Something about her smile made his morning unexpectedly better. Which was probably dangerous. Grant made a thoughtful noise. Mike ignored him. Morning, Bill called. Morning. Sarah looked around. I think there are more people here than last week. There are. Do they multiply when nobody is looking? Mike considered the question. Possibly. Bill nodded. Veterans travel in herds. Sarah looked at her father. Herds? You heard me. Mike laughed. The easy banter returned immediately, like they were continuing a conversation instead of starting a new one. He liked that, far more than he probably should have. The morning passed quickly. Colors were raised. Grant gave a brief speech. Coffee was consumed in dangerous quantities. When things finally began winding down, Mike carried folding chairs toward a storage trailer. He nearly made it without incident. Nearly. Chief. Mike looked over his shoulder. Sarah stood several yards away. He smiled. Morning. It's almost noon. Civilian detail. There it is. What? Military language. Mike laughed. I don't talk like that. You absolutely talk like that. No. You called a driveway a staging area earlier. Mike paused. I may have. You definitely did. That's not military. Sarah folded her arms. It is absolutely military. Bill appeared from nowhere. She's right. Mike pointed at him. You're supposed to be neutral. I raised her. I know when she's right. Sarah looked delighted. Mike was beginning to suspect the Bennett family enjoyed teamwork when they had a target. The target was apparently him. A terrifying realization. Over the following weeks, Mike encountered Sarah in places that should not have made statistical sense. First, it was a grocery store. He was examining coffee when he heard a familiar voice. That's entirely too much coffee. Mike turned. Sarah stood beside a shopping cart. He glanced at his basket. There were several bags. How much coffee is the correct amount? Less than that. According to who? Medical science. I am medical science. Sarah blinked, then laughed. A nearby shopper looked confused. Mike felt oddly triumphant. So this is your defense? She asked. I'm a medical professional. You sound very confident. I spent 24 years learning things. Mostly about coffee, apparently. Some subjects are critical. Sarah shook her head. You're impossible. That's not what my performance evaluations said. She stared at him for 2 seconds, then laughed hard enough she had to grab the shopping cart. Mike found himself grinning. The sound was contagious. The second encounter happened at a hardware store. The third happened at a restaurant. The fourth happened at Brandon's favorite local burger place. That particular meeting proved memorable for an entirely different reason. Mike had barely sat down with his son before Sarah walked in carrying a takeout order. She spotted them immediately. Brandon followed Mike's gaze. His eyes narrowed. Oh, Mike knew that tone. What? That's her. Who? The lady from Sundays. Mike frowned. You've met hundreds of people from Sundays. Brandon looked unconvinced. No, Dad. Mike's stomach sank. Teenagers sometimes possessed frightening powers of observation. Sarah approached the table. Hi, Mike. Sarah. She smiled at Brandon. You must be Brandon. The teenager nodded. You must be Sarah. Mike closed his eyes briefly. They had skipped directly past subtlety. Wonderful. Sarah looked amused. Your father talks about you constantly. Brandon pointed at Mike. He talks about you too. Traitor. Complete and absolute traitor. Mike felt heat crawl up his neck. Brandon. What? The teenager looked genuinely innocent. Nobody bought it. Sarah bit her lip, very clearly trying not to laugh. Nice to meet you, Brandon. You too. The teenager paused, then added, my dad needs hobbies. Mike stared. My dad's entire personality is work, swimming, and helping people. Sarah nodded seriously. A serious problem. Exactly. Mike looked skyward. No assistants arrived. Typical. Sarah collected her order. Before leaving, she gave him a sympathetic smile. Good luck. Then she walked out. Brandon watched her leave. She's pretty. Mike nearly choked on a French fry. The teenager nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, definitely pretty. Would you stop? Nope. Mike suddenly understood every joke parents made about teenagers. Every single one. A few days later, Mike finished a shift at the hospital and found himself sitting on his back patio. The autumn evening felt pleasant. The pool reflected the fading orange sky. His phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Need advice. Mike immediately answered. Everything okay? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, how do you tell if a girl likes you? Mike stared at the screen. The irony nearly killed him. His son had chosen perhaps the least qualified person on earth. Still, he tried. Talk to her. Spend time together. Pay attention to how she acts around you. A response came immediately. That's terrible advice. Mike laughed out loud. Thanks. You're welcome. Then another message arrived. By the way, Sarah likes you. Mike froze. His son had inherited sniper accuracy. Where'd that come from? That. Everyone knows. Not everyone. Grant knows. Mike groaned. Mom knows too. How? Because she's not blind. Mike set the phone down and considered throwing it in the pool. Instead, he rubbed his face. Apparently, his personal life had become community knowledge. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. The following Sunday arrived with unusually cool weather. The crowd for colors had continued growing. Veterans from multiple branches mingled together. Families occupied folding chairs. Several local news reporters had even appeared briefly the week before. Grant hated the attention, which made everyone else enjoy it more. Mike was helping an elderly Navy veteran navigate the lawn when he heard someone clear their throat behind him. He turned. Sarah stood there holding 2 cups of coffee. You look busy. I am busy. She handed him one of the cups. That's why I brought reinforcements. Mike accepted it. Thank you. You're welcome. For a few moments they watched the crowd together. Children played near the sidewalk. Veterans exchanged stories. Grant appeared to be teaching a group of recruits something. Probably loudly. The old Marine believed volume improved education. Sarah smiled. You built something special. Mike shook his head. Grant built it. You helped. A little. A lot. Mike looked away. Praise still made him uncomfortable. Sarah seemed to notice. She changed the subject. You never talk about yourself much. He shrugged. Not much to tell. Her expression said she didn't believe that for a second. 24 years in the Navy. Okay. Some things to tell. You've traveled all over the world. True. You've done things most people can't imagine. Mike laughed softly. When you put it that way. When I put it accurately. He took a sip of coffee. Sarah sipped hers. The comfortable silence stretched. Neither seemed in a hurry to break it. Eventually she nodded toward the crowd. Why do you do this? Mike watched a Vietnam veteran helping a young recruit straighten his collar. The answer came easily. Because people need places to belong. Sarah looked at him. Mike continued watching the crowd. When I was deployed, I had Marines I trusted with my life. His voice remained quiet. After retirement, I realized how much I'd missed that. The crowd laughed at something Bill said nearby. Mike smiled. And then this happened. Sarah studied him for several seconds. The teasing faded from her expression. What remained felt warmer. more genuine. I think they're lucky you showed up. For a moment Mike wasn't sure what to say. Years of military service had prepared him for countless situations. Not this one. Not her. Fortunately, Bill Bennett chose that exact moment to save him. Or possibly make things worse. Daughter. Sarah sighed. What? Bill pointed at Mike. Good one. Mike laughed. Sarah covered her face. Please stop helping. No. The older man grinned. I don't think I will. As Bill wandered away, Mike and Sarah exchanged a look. Then both started laughing. And for the first time since his divorce all those years ago, Mike Howell realized something surprising. He wasn't simply enjoying Sarah's company. He was looking for it, wanting it, and that realization was far more frightening than anything he'd encountered during 24 years in uniform. Chapter 4. Poolside Diplomacy. The idea started with Grant. That alone should have warned Mike Howell it was going to become complicated. Grant appeared at Sunday's gathering carrying a folding chair, a travel mug, and a suspicious amount of confidence. Mike recognized trouble immediately. The retired Marine sat down beside him. Chief. Major. We should have a barbecue. Mike frowned. We already have coffee. Grant looked disappointed. That's your argument? It's a strong argument. It absolutely is not. Mike sipped his coffee. The morning crowd continued mingling around them. Veterans, families, recruits, and neighbors occupied nearly every available chair. The gathering had transformed into something larger than anyone expected. People looked forward to it now. Some planned entire weekends around attending. Grant gestured at everyone. Look at this. Mike did. Children played near the sidewalk. Retirees traded stories. A World War II veteran's grandson listened intently, while an Army colonel explained the importance of good boots. The scene made Mike smile. It's good. It's bigger than good. Grant leaned forward. It's community. The Marine pointed directly at him. Which means we need food. Mike sighed. Naturally. Everything eventually became food. Fine. Grant grinned. At your house. Mike blinked. What? You have a pool. Several nearby veterans immediately agreed. Apparently they'd been listening. Traitors. That's not how decisions are made. Seems pretty democratic to me. Mike looked around. Hands were raising. People were actually voting. He hated how quickly this was happening. Bill Bennett appeared from nowhere. I vote yes. Nobody asked. Still yes. More hands went up. Grant looked delighted. Mike pinched the bridge of his nose. This feels suspiciously like a coup. It is a coup, Grant admitted. At least you're honest. The Marine nodded. We've discussed it. That's somehow worse. By the end of the morning, a barbecue had been scheduled. Mike lost the vote by a landslide. The following Saturday arrived bright and warm. Mike stood beside 3 large coolers while staring at his backyard. Several folding tables had been arranged around the patio. The pool sparkled under the afternoon sun. The grill sat ready. Everything looked prepared. That should have comforted him. Instead, it made him nervous. Relax. Mike turned. Brandon carried a tray of hamburger buns toward a table. I'm relaxed. No. The teenager laughed. You've checked everything 5 times. Preparation prevents problems. Military. It's common sense. Brandon pointed. Military. Mike was preparing a response when the first guests arrived. And then more arrived. And more. Apparently people really liked free food. Within 30 minutes the backyard had filled with neighbors, veterans, friends, and family. Grant immediately took command of a lawn chair near the grill. Nobody knew how. Nobody questioned it. The position somehow became his. Bill Bennett arrived shortly afterward with Sarah. Mike noticed her before he'd consciously registered looking. She wore jeans, a light blue shirt, and an easy smile. Simple, comfortable, beautiful. The realization hit with enough force to annoy him. Bill waved. Chief. Mike greeted him, then turned toward Sarah. Glad you could make it. Thank you for inviting us. Her eyes moved across the backyard. This is nice. Mike smiled. The pool sold me. It would. What does that mean? You mention that pool constantly. I do not. She stared at him. Bill stared at him. Brandon stared at him. Mike realized he was outnumbered. Again. Okay. Maybe a little. Sarah laughed. A little. The sound did unfortunate things to Mike's concentration. The first several hours passed smoothly. Too smoothly. In retrospect, Mike should have known better. Large gatherings eventually generated chaos. It was practically a law of nature. The first sign appeared when Grant challenged an Army veteran to a grilling competition. Nobody understood how. One moment they were discussing ribs. The next they were competing. The argument escalated rapidly. Judges became involved. Scorecards appeared. Several Marines acted as though international diplomacy rested on the outcome. Mike wisely stayed away. The second sign appeared when Brandon organized pool games. Teenagers multiplied alarmingly fast. Soon half the backyard contained splashing, cannonballs, and enough noise to be heard several streets away. Mike didn't mind. The sound of his son laughing always made his day better. He was carrying drinks toward a table when Sarah fell into step beside him. Your event has become surprisingly successful. My event? She nodded. You hosted it. I was voluntold. Sarah laughed. That's definitely military. Mike pretended to consider it. Possibly. Absolutely. They reached the table. Neither immediately walked away. The conversation simply continued. As it often seemed to do lately, Sarah watched Brandon launch himself into the pool. The splash drenched several nearby spectators. Grant was among the casualties. The retired major looked offended. Everyone else looked amused. Sarah smiled. He's happy. Mike followed her gaze toward Brandon. The warmth in his chest came instantly. Yeah. A simpler answer didn't exist. For a moment they watched in silence. Then Sarah spoke quietly. You're a good father. Mike blinked. The comment caught him off guard. I try. I know. He looked away. Praise still sat awkwardly on his shoulders, especially about Brandon. Too many missed birthdays. Too many deployments. Too many years measured by leave requests and airport terminals. Sarah seemed to understand. She leaned against the table. You know something? What? Brandon doesn't talk like someone who's been disappointed. Mike looked at her. He talks like someone who's proud of his dad. The words landed harder than she probably realized. For several moments Mike couldn't think of an answer. Finally he settled on honesty. That means a lot. Sarah smiled. There was no teasing in the expression this time. Only sincerity. Something inside him shifted slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. Later that afternoon a crisis emerged. At least according to Grant. The retired Marine marched across the patio carrying a paper plate. Chief. Mike recognized the tone. Trouble. What happened? Sabotage. Mike sighed. Grant. The Army is cheating. Across the yard an Army veteran held up a trophy somebody had apparently manufactured from pool supplies and duct tape. Cheers erupted. Grant looked personally wounded. Unacceptable. Mike rubbed his forehead. How old are you? Old enough to know dishonor when I see it. Sarah overheard the conversation and nearly dropped her drink laughing. He's serious. He absolutely is. Grant pointed toward the trophy. Tell me that isn't suspicious. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It's definitely suspicious. The Marine looked vindicated. Mike looked betrayed. You too. Sorry. She wasn't sorry at all. The grin made that obvious. As sunset approached, the crowd gradually began shrinking. Families departed. Neighbors headed home. Veterans carried leftovers toward vehicles. The backyard finally started growing quiet. Mike stood beside the pool collecting empty cups. The peaceful ending felt satisfying. Mission accomplished. Then Sarah appeared carrying a stack of plates. You missed these. Thanks. Together they loaded items into a trash bag. The comfortable rhythm felt natural. Easy. Mike found himself wishing the evening wasn't ending. An unfamiliar thought. A dangerous one. The pool reflected the orange glow of sunset. The remaining voices had faded into background noise. For a few moments it felt like they occupied their own corner of the evening. Sarah set down the last plate. Can I tell you something? Sure. She hesitated briefly. Not long. Just enough for Mike to notice. I almost didn't come today. That surprised him. Why? She studied the water. When things get serious, I tend to leave. Mike remained silent. Something about her expression told him not to interrupt. When I was younger, I got engaged. Mike listened. Everyone thought it was perfect. Her smile carried no humor. Turns out perfect isn't real. The simple statement carried old hurt behind it. He left. She nodded. A month before the wedding. Mike winced. Damn. Yeah. Neither spoke for a moment. The memory clearly still stung even after all these years. Sarah folded her arms. Ever since then, I've gotten really good at keeping people at a comfortable distance. Mike understood more than she realized. Military life created its own version of distance. Different causes. Similar results. You came anyway. She looked at him. I did. Mike thought carefully about his response, then chose honesty. I'm glad. The words slipped out before he could analyze them. Sarah's expression softened. So am I. For a moment neither looked away. The air felt charged with something neither wanted to name yet. Not because it wasn't there. Because they weren't ready. A loud voice shattered the moment. Hey! Grant. Of course it was Grant. Both of them turned. The retired Marine stood beside the grill. Bill Bennett stood beside him. The two older men looked entirely too pleased with themselves. What's going on? Mike yelled. Bill answered. Nothing. Grant nodded. Absolutely nothing. Mike narrowed his eyes. Sarah started laughing. Oh no. What? Our fathers. Mike blinked. Our? She pointed. Bill and Grant were now talking. Animatedly. Like old friends. Mike felt a sinking sensation. Oh, yeah. The two older men both looked toward them at exactly the same moment. Then exchanged grins. Mike groaned. Sarah covered her face. We're never going to survive this. No. She laughed again. Probably not. Mike found himself joining her. And as the autumn sunset reflected across the pool, he realized something important. For months after retirement, he'd worried about what came next, what life would become, what purpose would look like without a uniform. Standing there beside Sarah, listening to laughter drift across his backyard, watching friends and family fill a home that finally felt lived in, Mike discovered the answer might be far simpler than he'd expected. Maybe the next chapter of his life wasn't something he needed to find. Maybe it was already beginning. Chapter 5, Friendly Fire. For the first time in months, Mike Howell found himself overthinking everything. It was an unfamiliar and deeply irritating experience. Military medicine rewarded decisive action. Someone was hurt, you helped. Somebody needed something, you moved. Life became simpler when hesitation wasn't an option. Sarah Bennett somehow bypassed all of those instincts. She made him think, which often led to him saying less than he intended. That hadn't seemed like a problem until Thursday evening. Now it was definitely a problem. The realization arrived standing in his own driveway. Or more accurately, it arrived after watching Sarah drive away looking disappointed. Mike stared at the empty street. Damn! The word escaped before he could stop it. 3 days earlier, the hospital had asked him to help coordinate emergency preparedness planning. His combination of military medicine and administrative experience made him the logical choice. Mike had said yes. Of course he had. Helping people was practically wired into him. The project immediately consumed far more time than expected. Long days followed, then longer ones. Texts became shorter. Phone calls got delayed. Plans became postponed. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. Enough to create distance. Enough for misunderstandings to grow. Enough for Sarah to finally ask a question he'd been avoiding. Where exactly do I fit into your life? The problem wasn't the question. The problem was that Mike hadn't known how to answer quickly. And that hesitation had spoken volumes. Volumes he hadn't intended. The conversation replayed in his mind. Sarah had stopped by after work. They'd sat beside the pool as the evening settled around them. Everything had felt normal, comfortable, until it wasn't. You've been busy. Mike nodded. Hospitals got me helping with some planning. You mentioned. Something in her tone had made him look up. Sarah wasn't smiling. That immediately got his attention. Everything okay? She took a breath. For several seconds she seemed to debate whether to continue. Then she did. You know what the strange thing is? Mike waited. When you're around, you give people your complete attention. He nodded. Okay. It's one of the things I like about you. The statement caught him slightly off guard. Then her expression softened. And lately it feels like everyone gets that attention except you. Mike frowned. What do you mean? Sarah looked toward the water. The hospital gets it. People need help. The Sunday group gets it. They need help too. Grant gets it. Mike felt tension creeping into the conversation. The kind that always arrived before trouble. Sarah looked back at him. And that's wonderful, Mike. Her voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. I mean that. He stayed quiet. But where does it stop? The question landed heavily. Mike stared. She continued. Because every story you've told me ends the same way. He didn't like where this was going. Sarah, please let me finish. Mike nodded. She smiled sadly. Everything always comes first. The hospital, the Navy, the Marines, the Sunday veterans, responsibility, duty, service. She gestured around them. And they're all good things. The words grew quieter. But eventually you have to build something that's yours. For a moment silence settled. Mike searched for a response. A good one. The right one. Unfortunately, life rarely provided either on schedule. I'm trying. It sounded weak even to him. Sarah looked disappointed. Not angry. Not hostile. Disappointed. Mike would have preferred angry. At least anger pushed back. Disappointment simply sat there. You know the funny thing? She asked. What? I don't think you know how to stop taking care of everyone. Mike opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. Sarah stood. I should go. His stomach dropped. Sarah. She paused. I like you. The honesty in her voice hurt. A lot. Which is why I need you to understand something. Mike rose to his feet. She met his eyes. I don't want to spend years competing with everything else in your life. Then she left. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Which somehow felt worse. The following Sunday felt wrong. The gathering proceeded normally. People arrived. Colors were raised. Coffee flowed. Conversations continued. Everything looked exactly the same. Mike just wasn't enjoying it. Grant noticed immediately. Unfortunately, the old Marine approached carrying 2 coffees. You're being moody. I'm not. Chief. What? I commanded Marines. Grant handed him a cup. I know what moody looks like. Mike accepted defeat. The Marine nodded. Good. Several moments passed. Then Grant spoke again. You screwed up, didn't you? Mike nearly choked. That's direct. I'm old. That's not an excuse. It's my favorite excuse. Mike laughed despite himself. Grant waited patiently. The silence eventually won. Mike explained. Not every detail. Enough. The Marine listened, occasionally grunting, occasionally nodding, mostly looking annoyingly wise. When Mike finished, Grant rubbed his chin. She's right. Mike stared. You're supposed to be on my side. I am. Some support would be nice. Grant ignored that. Let me ask you something. Mike prepared for trouble. When was the last time somebody took care of you? The question caught him completely off guard. What? You heard me. Mike frowned. I don't need people taking care of me. Grant pointed directly at him. And there it is. What? That right there. The Marine shook his head. You spent 2 decades putting everyone else first. Mike shrugged. That's the job. Not anymore. The words landed harder than expected. Grant leaned back. Retirement isn't about finding a new mission. Mike looked skeptical. The Marine smiled. It's about realizing you already completed the old one. Before Mike could respond, Grant stood. Conversation over. Typical Marine. Drop wisdom. Refuse elaboration. Walk away. Infuriating. Things became worse on Tuesday, because Brandon got involved. Mike should have known better. Teenagers possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify emotional weaknesses. Brandon arrived after school carrying a backpack and dangerous levels of curiosity. You look grumpy. Thank you. You're welcome. Mike pointed toward the refrigerator. There's pizza. The teenager brightened, then narrowed his eyes. What's going on? Nothing. That's a lie. Mike sighed. I'm getting ambushed by everyone. By everyone? Grant. That's fair. And now you. Brandon grabbed pizza. So definitely Sarah. Mike stared. His son grinned. You people aren't subtle. What people? The adults pretending not to like each other. Mike considered throwing the remaining pizza at him. Brandon sat across from him. You know she likes you, right? Mike groaned. Can we stop discussing my personal life? No. The answer arrived instantly. Of course it did. Brandon shrugged. She's easy to talk to. I know. She makes you laugh. I know. You're happier. Mike stopped. The teenager wasn't teasing anymore. His expression had grown serious. The change got Mike's attention. Brandon nodded once. You're happier. The simple statement hit unexpectedly hard. Kids notice things, especially their parents. Mike slowly leaned back. When did you get smart? Recently. You should stop. Impossible. They both laughed. Then Brandon sobered. You spent my whole life showing up whenever you could. Mike listened. The teenager took a bite of pizza. I don't think anybody doubts you care. The next words came quietly. But showing up isn't the same as staying. Mike felt something tighten in his chest. Brandon wasn't accusing him. That somehow made it more important. She's asking you to stay, Dad. The room fell silent. Mike stared at the table. His 14-year-old son had just summarized the situation better than he had, which was humbling and mildly horrifying. Friday evening found Mike standing on Bill Bennett's front porch. This felt ridiculous. 42 years old, a retired chief, combat veteran, experienced leader, nervous, completely nervous. The door opened. Bill immediately smiled. Oh, this is interesting. Mike sighed. Good evening, Bill. You're in trouble. Yes. The older man nodded. Good. Mike blinked. What? Bill stepped aside. Shows you're serious. That wasn't the response he expected. Inside, Sarah looked up from the living room. Surprise flashed across her face. Mike ignored Bill quietly retreating into the kitchen. Coward. The older man was absolutely listening from around the corner. Everyone knew it. Sarah stood. Hi. Hi. For a moment neither knew what to say. Then Mike took a breath. The way he would before doing something difficult. Honesty usually worked best, so he tried it. I think you were right. Sarah looked surprised. Mike continued before he lost courage. My whole life has been about responsibility. She listened quietly. I joined the Navy because I couldn't afford college. A small smile touched his face. Then somehow one enlistment became 24 years. Sarah nodded. Mike looked down briefly. I got used to people needing me. The admission felt strangely uncomfortable. When somebody needs help, I move. He met her eyes. That's who I am. I know. But that's not all I am. The words came easier now. Because they were true. I just forgot that. Sarah stayed silent, giving him room. Mike appreciated that. What I should have said the other night. He paused, then pushed forward. What I should have said was that you're already important to me. The room felt very quiet. I'm just trying to figure out who Mike Howell is when nobody's giving him orders anymore. Sarah studied him, then finally smiled. A real smile. The kind he'd missed. That's a better answer. Mike laughed softly. Yeah, it is. Several heartbeats passed. Then Sarah crossed the room. Not far. Just close enough. I don't need perfection, Mike. That's good. Why? Because nobody's getting that. She laughed. The familiar sound immediately eased something inside him. Sarah shook her head. I just need effort. The words reminded him unexpectedly of his parents. His father the welder. His mother the school secretary. Two people who had spent a lifetime believing relationships weren't built on grand gestures. Just consistency, effort, showing up, staying. Mike smiled. That sounds reasonable. It is. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Then nodded once. Okay. The answer wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't poetic. But it was sincere. And for Mike Howell, sincerity had always mattered more than anything else. As Sarah smiled back at him, he realized something important. Some wounds weren't caused by enemies. Sometimes the most dangerous friendly fire came from old habits. Fortunately, this was one mistake he still had time to correct. Chapter 6, Tactics and Strategy. The first official date happened because Mike Howell finally stopped trying to be clever. His attempts at subtlety had accomplished absolutely nothing. Fortunately, Sarah Bennett considered that one of his more endearing flaws. They were walking through a local farmer's market on a Saturday morning when Mike decided enough was enough. The weather was pleasant. The crowd was manageable. Sarah was laughing at a display of decorative pumpkins that looked vaguely threatening. Felt like a good moment, or at least as good a moment as any. Mike took a breath. Can I ask you something? Sarah glanced over. You just did. There it is. What? Exactly why this is harder than it should be. Her smile widened. Now she looked interested. Dangerous. What are you trying to ask, Chief? The title was deliberately chosen. He knew it. She knew it. Would you like to go to dinner with me next Friday? Sarah stared. Mike. His stomach immediately tightened. She sounded way too amused. Yes. We've been spending time together for months. Yes. We've had coffee. Yes. We've had lunch. Yes. We've been to movies. Mike frowned. One movie. She ignored that. We've taken walks. Technically, yes. Sarah folded her arms. So what exactly do you think we've been doing? Mike opened his mouth, then stopped. The answer arrived a moment too late. Sarah started laughing. Hard. Several nearby shoppers looked over. Mike sighed. I walked directly into that one. You absolutely did. Eventually she took pity on him. Friday sounds wonderful. Mike smiled despite himself. Good. You know what's funny? What? You fought in combat. Several times. And asking me to dinner scared you more. Mike thought about it. Then nodded. Honestly? Probably. Sarah laughed all over again. The relationship changed gradually after that. Neither rushed. Neither wanted to. For the first time in years, both of them seemed determined to let something develop naturally. Mike liked that. Life had contained enough chaos already. Their dinners became regular. Movie nights happened. Sarah occasionally joined him and Brandon for outings. Brandon immediately approved of the arrangement. Probably too enthusiastically. The teenager and Sarah had developed a suspicious alliance. Mike didn't trust it. Not even slightly. The realization arrived one evening when all three of them were sitting around his kitchen table eating takeout. Sarah vanished into the hallway. The moment she disappeared, Brandon looked across the table. Dad. The tone alone made Mike nervous. What? The teenager nodded toward the hallway. I like her. Mike stared. Good. Like really like her. Still good. Brandon pointed a French fry at him. Don't mess this up. Mike nearly choked. What happened to respecting your elders? You retired. That's not how that works. It should be. Mike was preparing a counterattack when Sarah returned. Brandon immediately became innocent. Far too innocent. The teenager was learning. That was unfortunate. Sunday gatherings continued growing. By early spring, the weekly ceremony had become a local tradition. Attendance fluctuated but never disappeared. Veterans from every branch participated. Families came regularly. Some people simply stopped by for coffee and conversation. Others attended because it helped them feel connected to something larger than themselves. Grant loved every minute, especially the attention he claimed to hate. Mike noticed that contradiction. So did everyone else. One particular Sunday began like any other. The crowd gathered. The flag waited neatly folded. Veterans exchanged greetings. Children played near the sidewalk. Everything appeared normal, until a shout erupted near the back of the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. An elderly man collapsed beside a row of folding chairs. Training took over instantly. Mike didn't think. He moved. One moment he was standing beside Grant. The next he was kneeling beside the fallen veteran. Call 911. His voice remained calm, controlled. Several people immediately reacted. The crowd parted. Someone brought space. Someone else grabbed emergency contact information. Years of military experience had taught Mike to focus on the problem directly in front of him. Nothing else mattered. Not panic. Not noise. Not confusion. The veteran's pulse felt irregular. Breathing shallow. Skin pale. Mike began assessing. Questions. Observations. Actions. The rhythm came naturally. As familiar as breathing. Around him the world seemed to narrow. People spoke. Sirens sounded distantly. Someone cried. Mike barely registered any of it. The patient needed help. Everything else could wait. Several minutes later paramedics arrived. Mike gave a concise report. Clear, professional, efficient. Exactly the way he'd done hundreds of times before. The crew loaded the veteran onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics paused. You Army? Navy? The paramedic looked surprised. Really? Hospital Corpsman. Recognition flashed immediately. That makes sense. A moment later the ambulance departed. The gathering remained unusually quiet. People watched it leave. Concern lingered across faces. Mike exhaled slowly. The adrenaline began fading. His hands remained steady. They always did. Sarah appeared beside him. He hadn't even realized she'd moved closer. How is he? Mike nodded. I think he'll be okay. Relief crossed her features. Then she studied him carefully. The second he went down, you changed. Mike frowned. What do you mean? You got focused. The description seemed obvious. Someone needed help. Sarah shook her head gently. Most people panic. Mike looked around. Several attendees were clearly shaken. Understandably, medical emergencies scared people. He understood that. Sarah smiled softly. You don't. Mike shrugged. No point. The answer felt simple. Because it was. Panic didn't help patients. Action did. Sarah continued watching him. Something about her expression made him uncomfortable. Not in a bad way. Just unfamiliar. Later he would realize the look was admiration. At the time he simply wasn't used to receiving it. Good news arrived Monday afternoon. The veteran was recovering well in the hospital. The entire Sunday community seemed to celebrate. Grant declared victory despite contributing nothing medically. Nobody challenged him. Mike suspected they valued peace. Tuesday evening found Mike sitting on his back patio watching the sunset. The pool reflected gold and orange light. A familiar knock sounded at the side gate. Sarah. He smiled automatically now. A development he considered unavoidable. She stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. You know I have coffee. I know. She handed him one. Mine's better. Mike sipped. The annoying thing was that she was right. Showing off. A little. They settled into chairs. Comfortable silence stretched between them. One of Mike's favorite things about Sarah was that she never seemed afraid of silence. She didn't rush to fill every moment. She simply existed beside him. The older he got, the more valuable that felt. Finally Sarah spoke. I went to see Bill today. Mike blinked. Your father. He's fine. Relief immediately followed. Not because Bill was elderly. Because Mike had grown fond of him. The stubborn old man had become important. Sarah smiled. He wanted me to tell you something. Mike sighed. That could mean anything. What? He said you're a good man. Mike laughed softly. That's nice. No. She shook her head. He specifically ordered me to tell you. Ordered. His exact words. Mike nodded. That sounded like Bill. Anything else? Sarah's expression warmed. He said people spend too much time looking for perfect relationships. Mike listened. He thinks they should look for dependable people instead. The words reminded Mike strongly of his parents. Effort matters. Showing up matters. Dependability matters. Simple lessons. Powerful ones. He smiled. Your father is smarter than he pretends. Don't tell him that. I won't. He'll become unbearable. The thought made them both laugh. Then silence returned. Comfortable. Peaceful. Easy. Mike looked toward the setting sun. Then toward Sarah. The realization arrived quietly. Without fanfare. Without drama. Without hesitation. He wasn't wondering anymore. Not about her. Not about them. The uncertainty that had followed retirement was fading. Not completely. Life never worked that way. But enough. Enough that he could finally see a future taking shape. Not an assignment. Not a mission. Not a deployment cycle. A future. His future. And Sarah was standing right in the middle of it. The thought should have frightened him. Instead it felt right. Like finding a path he'd been searching for without realizing it. Sarah glanced over. What? Mike smiled. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. That's suspicious. It probably is. Want to tell me? He considered it. Not yet. Some truths deserved the proper moment. Instead he raised his coffee. Just thinking. Sarah tapped her cup against his. Dangerous habit. Mike laughed. Maybe it was. But for the first time in a very long time, he liked where those thoughts were leading. Chapter 7. Forward momentum. For most of his adult life, Mike Howell measured time differently than everyone else. Life had been divided into deployments, training cycles, duty stations, promotion boards, orders. Everything existed on a timeline controlled by somebody else. Now, for the first time since graduating high school, he found himself making plans that belonged entirely to him. It was a strange feeling. A good one, but strange. The realization hit him on an ordinary Thursday evening, which seemed appropriate. The best moments rarely announced themselves. Mike stood in his kitchen preparing dinner while Brandon sat at the counter finishing homework. Or at least pretending to finish homework. The distinction mattered. That's wrong. Brandon looked up. What is? Mike pointed toward the worksheet. Your math. The teenager frowned. No, it isn't. It is. No. Mike walked over. 30 seconds later Brandon leaned back dramatically. I hate when you're right. Mike smiled. No you don't. That's true. The teenager sighed. I hate that you're usually right. Better. A knock sounded at the front door. Brandon immediately brightened. Sarah. Mike narrowed his eyes. You're awfully confident. I can tell. How? Normal people knock once. The teenager pointed toward the door. Sarah does 2 quick knocks. The second knock sounded exactly as he described. Mike blinked. That was mildly unsettling. Brandon grinned. Told you. Mike opened the door. Sarah stood there carrying a container. I made cookies. Brandon appeared behind Mike instantly, like a shark approaching blood in the water. Excellent. Sarah laughed. Hello to you too. Cookies are a greeting. Mike shook his head. Don't encourage him. It's too late. She stepped inside. The house felt brighter when she did. Mike had stopped trying to deny that weeks ago. They ate dinner together, talked, laughed, argued briefly about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Sarah and Brandon united against him. The betrayal was profound. Afterward they moved to the backyard. The evening air felt comfortable. Pool lights reflected softly across the water. Brandon eventually disappeared inside to play games with friends. That left Mike and Sarah alone. They settled into chairs near the edge of the patio. The silence between them never felt awkward anymore. Comfortable quiet had become one of Mike's favorite things. Sarah looked toward the pool. You seem happy. Mike considered the statement, then nodded. I am. The answer surprised him. Not because it wasn't true, because it came so easily. Months ago he would have needed time to think about it. Now he didn't. Sarah smiled. Good. Mike studied her profile. The fading sunlight caught strands of hair the wind had loosened. She looked peaceful. Content. The sight did interesting things to his heart. Possibly alarming things. So do you. She looked over. I am. Neither looked away. The moments stretched comfortably between them. Not rushed. Not forced. Simply shared. Mike realized he couldn't remember the last time being with someone had felt this easy. Maybe never. The Sunday gathering continued evolving. By summer, it had become something the community genuinely cherished. Attendance often exceeded 200 people. Veterans from every era attended. Families brought children. Local businesses occasionally donated coffee and pastries. The recruiters still participated regularly. New recruits often seemed shocked by how many veterans voluntarily showed up every week. Grant loved shocking recruits. It was one of his hobbies. Straighten up. The retired major paced before a group of young Marines one Sunday morning. You're representing generations of Marines before you. One recruit adjusted his posture. Grant nodded approvingly. Better. Mike watched from nearby. Sarah stood beside him holding a coffee cup. Does he ever stop? No. Ever. No. She laughed. I was afraid of that. Across the lawn, Bill Bennett sat surrounded by other retirees. The older man appeared to be telling stories. The size of his audience suggested he was having success. Mike followed Sarah's gaze. Your dad has become popular. He's always been popular. She smiled fondly. He's never met a stranger. The statement was accurate. Bill could start conversations with fence posts. The fence posts would probably enjoy them. Mike looked around the gathering. Something felt different now. Not the event itself. His place within it. Months ago he'd been searching for direction. Trying to understand who he was without the uniform. Now he wasn't searching anymore. He still loved helping. Still volunteered. Still worked at the hospital. But none of it felt like filling a void. It was simply his life. Full one. A meaningful one. A life that finally belonged to him. Sarah nudged his shoulder. What are you thinking about? I was wondering when all this happened. She glanced around. The gathering. No. Mike smiled. Everything. Understanding slowly appeared in her eyes. A softer smile followed. One day at a time. The answer sounded simple. Maybe because the best answers usually were. Several weeks later, Mike found himself sitting on his parents' back porch. The visit had been overdue. His father retired from welding years earlier but somehow remained incapable of sitting still. His mother still treated everyone within 100 yards as if they needed feeding. Some things never changed. His father leaned back in a chair. She's good for you. Mike sighed. There it was. Eventually everyone reached the same topic. Hello to you too. His father ignored that. She's good for you. His mother nodded from nearby. Very good. Mike looked outnumbered. Again, a recurring theme. You two work fast. His father laughed. Son. The older man's expression softened. I haven't seen you this relaxed in 20 years. The words carried weight, because they came from someone who knew him better than almost anyone. Mike listened. His father shrugged. Figured it was worth mentioning. His mother smiled. We like her. That's good. It would be awkward if we didn't. Mike laughed. His father pointed. Don't overcomplicate things. Dad. I'm serious. The older man leaned forward. When I met your mother, I knew exactly 2 things. Mike braced himself. 1. She was smarter than me. His mother smiled. Still true. Absolutely. His father nodded. 2. She made life better. The porch fell quiet for a moment. Mike looked between them. Married 44 years. Still teasing. Still smiling. Still showing up for each other every day. Effort. The lesson hadn't changed since childhood. His parents had always believed relationships weren't complicated. People made them complicated. His father pointed toward him. Don't miss something good because you're busy analyzing it. Mike shook his head. You've been waiting to say that. A little. Thought so. Later that night, Mike sat alone beside his pool. The house had grown quiet. Brandon was spending the weekend with friends. The neighborhood settled under a clear summer sky. He thought about retirement. About the Navy. About the life he'd built. About the life he was still building. Most of all, he thought about Sarah. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way. The realization felt too steady for that. Too certain. She had become part of his routine. Part of his future. Part of the things he looked forward to. The thought no longer scared him. A few months ago it might have. Now it simply felt true. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Still awake? Mike smiled. A response appeared immediately. Good. Why? Because I miss you. Mike stared at the screen. A slow smile spread across his face. For a man who had spent years crossing oceans, surviving combat zones, and adapting to every challenge life threw his way, the message somehow hit harder than all of it. His reply took only a moment. Miss you too. The 3 dots appeared. Then another message. Dinner tomorrow? Mike laughed softly. Forward momentum. That was what this was. Not rushing. Not stumbling. Not standing still. Just moving forward together. He looked out across the quiet pool. For the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt promising. And Mike Howell found himself eager to see what came next. Chapter 8. Colors at Sunset. The anniversary celebration started before sunrise. Mike Howell knew that because he was already awake when his alarm went off. Old habits died hard. He silenced the alarm, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the quiet house. A year. The thought lingered. 1 year since he had stood on a sidewalk waiting for a retired Marine major to come outside and raise a flag. 1 year since he had volunteered to help. 1 year since a simple act of respect had transformed into something none of them could have predicted. He smiled. Life was strange sometimes, in the best possible way. A knock sounded on his bedroom door. Mike glanced up. Come in. Brandon opened the door. Now 15, the teenager looked significantly taller than he had just a year before. Mike wasn't sure when that happened. He suspected witchcraft. Dad. Morning. You ready? Mike stood. As I'll ever be. Brandon nodded, then grinned. Nervous. Mike narrowed his eyes. About what? The teenager merely smiled. Mike immediately became suspicious. That expression usually meant trouble. What do you know? I know lots of things. What things? Brandon headed back into the hallway. You'll see. Mike sighed. Teenagers. By 7 o'clock, the street outside Grant Adams's house was already filling. Volunteers arranged parking. Families unfolded chairs. Veterans greeted one another with handshakes, back slaps, and stories they'd already told dozens of times. Nobody minded. Retelling stories was practically a military tradition. Mike stepped out of his truck and paused. The sight immediately stole his attention. The gathering was enormous. Hundreds of people occupied the area. Veterans from every branch. Active duty personnel. Recruiters. Local residents. Families. Children. People who simply wanted to be part of something meaningful. A year ago there had been 20 uniformed men standing in neat ranks. Now it looked like a community festival. Grant appeared beside him. The old Marine War Service dress blues. His medals caught the early morning light. So, Mike smiled. So, Grant folded his arms. We got a little carried away. A little. The Marine nodded thoughtfully. Worth it. Mike couldn't disagree. Not even slightly. Nearby, Sarah stood talking with Bill. The familiar sight immediately improved his mood. These days it always did. She noticed him and waved. The simple gesture somehow remained one of his favorite things. Mike walked over. Sarah smiled. Good morning. It is. Bill studied both of them. Oh, look. Mike sighed. Here we go. The older man pointed. They're doing the thing again. What thing? Sarah asked. The smiling. We smile all the time. Not like that. Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah. She was already fighting laughter. Bill looked pleased with himself. It makes me happy. No one asked. Still happy. Sarah kissed her father's cheek. The old man looked entirely victorious. Mike suspected that was intentional. Everything Bill did was intentional. As the morning continued, more people arrived. Several local officials attended. Former service members traveled from neighboring counties. Even some veterans who rarely left their homes had chosen to make the trip. That mattered to Mike. More than headlines. More than recognition. Connection had always been the point. Not attention. Never attention. Connection. At precisely the appointed time, the gathering settled. Conversations quieted. People found their places. The formation assembled. Mike stepped into position beside Grant. The retired major surveyed the crowd. For a brief moment his expression softened. Mike noticed. The old Marine was emotional. Nobody would survive pointing it out. But Mike noticed. Grant cleared his throat, then addressed the gathering. 1 year ago, a group of sailors and Marines stood on this lawn. His voice carried easily. The plan was simple. Laughter moved through the crowd. Grant nodded. As usual, the plan failed. Everyone laughed harder. Even Mike. The Marine waited, then continued. What replaced it was something better. His gaze moved across the gathering. People found each other here. The crowd grew quieter. Friendships were built here. A pause. Families grew here. Mike glanced toward Sarah. She was already looking at him. His chest tightened. The old Marine wasn't done. And some stubborn people finally figured out retirement doesn't mean your purpose is over. Grant looked directly at Mike. The crowd immediately followed his gaze. Mike groaned internally. The Marine was absolutely doing this on purpose. Grant grinned. Purpose changes. His voice softened. That's all. For a moment nobody spoke. The statement carried truth because it came from someone who had lived it. Grant stepped back. The ceremony began. Reveille sounded. The national ensign climbed steadily toward the morning sky. Everyone stood at attention. For a few moments the entire gathering existed in perfect stillness. Tradition, respect, memory, honor. Not because anyone had to, because they wanted to. When the final note faded, applause broke out naturally. Not for the flag, not for the ceremony, for the community that had gathered around it. The celebration lasted most of the day. Food appeared, stories circulated, children played, veterans shared memories, laughter echoed everywhere. Mike spent hours moving between groups, checking on people, helping organize details, greeting newcomers, exactly the sort of thing Sarah had once accused him of doing too much. The difference now was that he no longer lost himself in it. He participated, then returned. The distinction mattered. Late that afternoon, Mike found himself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching Brandon talk with a group of veterans. The teenager looked comfortable, confident, happy. Pride filled Mike immediately. A voice interrupted his thoughts. You did good. Mike turned. His ex-wife stood beside him. He blinked. You made it. Of course I did. They exchanged a brief hug. The interaction felt natural. Easy. Years had smoothed the sharp edges away. She followed his gaze toward Brandon. He's turning into a good man. Mike nodded. He is. A smile touched her face. We did okay. The simple statement meant more than she realized. Mike smiled back. Yeah. They had. Not perfectly, but well. Sometimes that was enough. After a few minutes she drifted off to rejoin her husband and family. Mike watched them go with genuine happiness. No bitterness. No regrets. Just gratitude. Life had worked out differently than either of them expected. That didn't make it bad. Just different. As evening approached, chairs began filling once again. The closing ceremony would soon begin. Taps would mark the end of the celebration. Sunset painted the sky gold and crimson. The colors reflected across windows, cars, and uniforms. The entire street looked warm, almost timeless. Mike found himself standing beside Sarah beneath a large oak tree. Neither needed to speak immediately. The comfortable silence remained one of his favorite things about her. Eventually she smiled. You look thoughtful. I am. Dangerous. So I've heard. Sarah laughed softly. The sound still affected him. After all this time, maybe more now than before. Mike looked toward the crowd. Grant, Bill, Brandon, friends, neighbors, families, people laughing, talking, belonging. A year ago he had worried retirement might take away who he was. Instead it had revealed who he could become. He looked at Sarah. Really looked at her. The woman who had challenged him, teased him, supported him, refused to let him hide behind old habits. His pulse accelerated slightly. 42 years old. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And completely unavoidable. Sarah tilted her head. What? Mike smiled, then decided to stop waiting. I love you. The words arrived simply, without dramatic buildup, without rehearsal, without fear, just truth. For a moment Sarah stared. Then her eyes widened. Not because she was surprised, because she wasn't. The smile that followed was radiant, warm, certain. She stepped closer. I was wondering how long that was going to take. Mike laughed. Relief flooded through him. That's your response? No. Her hand found his. This is. She rose slightly onto her toes and kissed him. The applause that followed was immediate, loud, and entirely unwanted. Both of them turned. Bill, Grant, Brandon, and apparently half the gathering were watching. Mike closed his eyes. Of course they were. Grant cupped his hands around his mouth. About time. The crowd erupted with laughter. Sarah covered her face. Mike pointed at the Marine. You planned this. I absolutely did. Bill nodded. So did I. Traitors. Nope, Grant replied. The old Marine grinned. Strategists. That somehow made everyone laugh harder. Even Mike. Especially Mike. Because for once, he didn't mind being the target. Not even a little. As the sun finally touched the horizon, taps echoed across the gathering. The crowd stood quietly. The flag descended. Respectful. Measured. Dignified. The ceremony concluded exactly as it should. When it ended, people slowly began heading home. The celebration was over. The tradition would continue next Sunday. And the Sunday after that. And probably for years to come. Mike stood beside Sarah watching the last light fade from the sky. His hand remained firmly in hers. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Mike looked upward as the first stars appeared. A retired chief petty officer. A father. A friend. A neighbor. A man in love. Not bad. Not bad at all. For the first time in his life, there were no deployment orders waiting. No departure date looming. No countdown hanging over tomorrow. Just home. Just family. Just love. As colors were retired with the setting sun, Mike Howell realized that the greatest chapter of his life hadn't been the one he left behind. It was the one he had finally found. Epilogue. Reveille. 5 years later, the alarm on Mike Howell's phone went off at 0500. He opened one eye, then immediately regretted opening it. Beside him, Sarah groaned. You know you're retired, right? Mike smiled into the darkness. I've been informed. Repeatedly. Also true. She pulled a pillow over her head. Normal people sleep. That's just a rumor. I married a crazy person. We've discussed this. A hand emerged from beneath the pillow. Her wedding ring caught the faint glow from the bedside clock. Mike couldn't help smiling. 5 years. Somehow 5 years had passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just steadily. The way good years tend to. Something thumped down the hallway. A door opened. Another door closed. Mike listened. Sarah sighed. That's Brandon. Yep. How old is he now? 19. Impossible. Mike nodded. That's what I keep saying. The truth still surprised him sometimes. Brandon was home from college for the summer. Taller than his father now. Confident. Kind. Smart. A young man Mike couldn't have been more proud of if he tried. There were moments when he still remembered the little boy he used to miss during deployments. Now that little boy was planning a future of his own. Life moved fast. Even when it felt slow. Mike rolled out of bed. Sarah pointed at him. We're talking about sleeping later tomorrow. Absolutely. You're lying. A little. She threw a pillow at him. Mike caught it effortlessly. 24 years with the Navy had taught him many valuable skills. Surviving thrown pillows was among them. The neighborhood remained quiet as Mike stepped outside. Dawn had not yet arrived. The familiar walk down the sidewalk felt comforting. Some routines became part of a person's soul. This was one of them. Halfway down the block he saw movement. Grant Adams stood waiting beside the flagpole. Older now. Slower. Still standing straight. Still wearing the same expression that suggested Marines were physically incapable of accepting surrender. The retired major spotted him. Chief. Major. Grant frowned. You've got gray hair. Mike laughed. So do you. Mine looks distinguished. Of course it does. The old Marine nodded. Glad we agree. Some things never changed. Thank God. They worked together in comfortable silence. The ritual remained the same after all these years. Preparation. Precision. Respect. Tradition. Around them, early arrivals began appearing. A truck parked. Then another. Then several more. By the time Reveille approached, dozens of people had already gathered. Mike smiled. The Sunday tradition had outgrown all of them. What began as a favor for one retired Marine had become something permanent. Something lasting. Families attended. Veterans attended. Children who had once played around folding chairs now volunteered to help organize events. Young recruits still appeared. Older veterans still shared stories. Every Sunday, rain or shine, year after year, the community kept showing up. Grant glanced toward the gathering. We should have charged admission. Mike laughed. That would have gone well. I know. The old Marine sighed dramatically. We could have been rich. Instead, we're respected. Grant considered that, then nodded. Fair trade. The ceremony concluded shortly after sunrise. As usual, nobody hurried home. Coffee appeared. Conversations started. Life happened. Bill Bennett occupied his usual seat near the front. Age had slowed him slightly. Not conversationally. Nothing could accomplish that. Sarah kissed her father on the cheek while refilling his coffee. The old man smiled, then immediately pointed toward Mike. Still a good one. Sarah rolled her eyes. Dad. I'm consistent. You certainly are. Mike sat beside them. Bill nodded approvingly. There he is. Morning, Bill. The older man gestured toward Sarah. Best decision you ever made. Sarah covered her face. Mike laughed. The funny thing was Bill wasn't entirely wrong. 5 years earlier Mike had worried retirement would leave a hole in his life. Instead, it had revealed everything he'd been missing. Home, community, friendship, love. Not dramatic things, important things. The things his parents had been talking about his entire life. Effort, showing up, staying. Simple lessons, powerful ones. Across the lawn, Brandon stood talking with a group of younger volunteers. Mike watched him for a moment. Sarah followed his gaze. You know he's going to be okay. I know. He learned from a good father. Mike looked at her. The old guilt from missed years occasionally surfaced. Probably always would. Sarah squeezed his hand. He knows how much you love him. The statement settled quietly inside his chest. Some wounds didn't disappear. They simply healed. And that was enough. Later that morning, after most people had headed home, Mike stood alone beside the flagpole. The neighborhood had grown quiet again. The breeze moved gently through the trees. Behind him, he heard familiar footsteps. Sarah. Always Sarah. She slipped her hand into his. No deep thoughts without me. Mike smiled. Is that a rule? It is now. He looked at her. The woman who had become his wife, his best friend, his partner in everything that mattered. The woman who had taught him that accepting love required as much courage as giving it. Not bad. Not bad at all. What were you thinking about? She asked. Mike considered the question, then glanced toward the flag flying above them, toward Grant's house, toward the neighborhood, toward the life he had built. The answer came easily. That I'm lucky. Sarah smiled. That's funny. What? I was thinking the exact same thing. Mike laughed softly, then leaned down and kissed her. The morning sun climbed higher above the street. A flag moved gently in the breeze. Somewhere down the block, Grant was probably arguing with someone about something completely unimportant. Bill was undoubtedly telling a story. Brandon was building a future. And Mike Howell stood exactly where he wanted to be. After a lifetime of deployments, departures, and uncertainty, he had finally discovered the truth. The most important mission of his life had never been overseas. It had been waiting here, at home. And every Sunday morning, as Reveille echoed across a quiet neighborhood, Mike got the privilege of remembering that all over again.